You know that old saying, you cannot catch fish in clean water?
Ah, yeah, the rich dad one.
Yeah.
Based on an old Chinese proverb, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And it really gets you thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That maybe the really valuable stuff, the useful insights, they're not always in the clean, simple places.
totally. And that fits perfectly with our deep dive today. We're getting into the ideas from Robert Kiyosaki's book, Fakey. Fake money, fake teachers, fake assets, based on our shared sources.
Right. And this isn't just a book report. We're trying to pull out the key ideas, the stuff that helps make sense of, the financial world today.
Trying to find those aha moments, like you said. And book's dedicated to those who seek the truth, so that's kind of our mission here, too.
Yeah, uncovering those insights without getting totally lost in the weeds. And it's interesting, Kiyosaki himself, he talks about struggling in school, failed English twice, apparently.
Hmm. But became a massive best-selling author through cooperation, learning outside the usual system. It kind of sets the stage.
It does. Okay, so let's dive in. First big topic, fake money. Where does he start with that?
Well, first, it's useful to know the timing. He finished the book in April 2018. It came out that fall. And he was already saying back then the future is fake. That's a pretty strong statement.
Definitely sets a tone. And he brings up this idea of extortion early on.
Yeah, but not just like, mobsters demanding money. He defines it as the act of extorting, using force to take money or property, but also adds a gross overcharge.
Ah, okay. So he's hinting that maybe some financial systems are kind of like that, a gross overcharge.
That seems to be the implication he's drawing. And it ties straight into one of his most basic lessons, the one everyone knows from Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Assets versus liabilities.
Exactly. Assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money out of your pocket. Simple, but he argues people constantly get it wrong.
Especially with houses, right? Everyone thinks their house is an asset.
Right. But he shows this chart, 2000 to 2016, where house prices actually went down. So if it's costing you money every month, repairs, mortgage interest, taxes, it can absolutely be a liability.
Okay, got it. Which then leads him to talk about the sheer scale of, finance.
Oh, yeah. He throws out this number for derivatives in 2018, an estimated $1.2 quadrillion.
Quadrillion. How big is that even?
It's mind-boggling. He breaks it down. A million is 1,000 thousands. A billion is 1,000 millions. A trillion is 1,000 billions.
Okay.
And a quadrillion is 1,000 trillions. So 1.2 thousand trillion dollars. His worry was about a potential quadrillion-dollar disaster.
Wow. I mean, just trying to wrap your head around that number is tough. The key thing
That's
is
a reality.
it's huge and interconnected.
That's the main point, the scale and the risk that he thinks isn't always acknowledged. And this kind of sets up one of his biggest challenges to conventional thinking.
Which is?
Lie, #1, saving money will make you rich.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that definitely goes against what most of us are taught. How does he back that up?
Well, he uses personal stories, like one from Vietnam in 1972, finding a potential gold mine
In Vietnam.
during the war.
Yeah, and trying to figure out if the gold was even real, making an opening bid of $40 an ounce, and then suddenly being told the Viet Cong were nearby. Crazy story.
Talk about high stakes. And wasn't owning gold illegal for Americans back then?
It was. Roosevelt's order from 1933 was still in effect, so that whole situation just sparked his curiosity about gold, its value, its connection to the U.S. dollar.
So that was the seed back in 72.
Right. And then later, in '83, he read Bucky Fuller's Grunch of Giants, and that apparently gave him more context for what he calls the global cash heist, this idea that wealth gets shifted around subtly through the money system.
Which leads us to Nixon, right? August 15th, 1971.
The big one. Nixon takes the U.S. dollar completely off the gold standard. No more convertibility.
And Kiyosaki links this timing to the whole Watergate affair that followed soon after. He does. The break-in, Agnew resigning, the impeachment vote, Nixon resigning, Ford's pardon. It all happened in the years right after that 71 decision. It makes him question that phrase on the dollar, "In God we trust."
Yeah, who exactly do you trust in that system?
It's a provocative question. He then gives a quick history lesson: paper money in Tang Dynasty China, Romans shaving bits off their coins, debasing them.
Right, watering down the value.
Exactly. And that leads to Gresham's law.
Yeah.
When bad fake money enters the system, good real money goes into hiding.
Meaning people hoard the real stuff if they think the paper stuff is losing value.
Precisely. He even remembers trading dollar bills for actual silver coins back in 1965 because people knew the silver was worth more.
And to show the danger, he points to Germany after World War I.
Yeah, that chart showing hyperinflation from 1918 to 1923, it's terrifying. People literally burning stacks of cash because it was worthless. A stark warning.
So we had the Bretton Woods Agreement in 44, trying to stabilize things with the dollar backed by gold.
Right, the dollar became the world's reserve currency. But that promise, the gold backing, was broken in 71. So the dollar effectively became, well, debt, an IOU from the government, not backed by gold anymore.
And this is where he gets into the banking system itself, the Mandrake's Magic Money Act.
Fractional reserve banking. The idea that banks can lend out way more money than they actually have in deposits, they essentially create money out of thin air.
Which works fine until everyone wants their money back at once. A bank run.
Exactly. That's when the magic trick gets exposed. He mentions FDIC insurance, of course, but that has limits $250,000 per depositor per bank.
And this introduces another key idea, counterparty risk.
Yes. Fake money, like an IOU or a bank deposit, depends on the other party making good on the promise. There's a risk they won't or can't.
But with real gold or silver.
There's no counterparty risk. It's just gold or silver. Its value isn't dependent on someone else's promise, except maybe, as he puts it, God's.
Okay, so how does this apply to something like the 2008 crash? He talks about CDOs and MBSs.
Right, collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities. He argues they were built on fake collateral.
Meaning the mortgages inside them were shaky.
Pretty much. It started with subprime mortgages loans to people less likely to repay. Banks issued them, then investment banks bundled thousands of these mortgages together into MBSs.
And sold them off as safe investments.
Exactly. But the foundation, the actual collateral, was those risky mortgages. So the security itself was, in his view, fake. When people started defaulting on those underlying loans, the whole house of cards collapsed.
Which brings us back to Warren Buffett's quote.
Financial weapons of mass destruction. A perfect description for those derivatives. And Kiyosaki notes they grew from maybe $700 trillion in 2007 to that $1.2 quadrillion figure by 2018.
Just massive growth. So, in contrast to all this fake money and complex derivatives, he champions God's money, gold and silver.
Yes. And he gives 7 practical reasons for owning them. Importantly, he says they're not investments in the traditional sense.
Okay, so what are some of those reasons? It's not about getting rich quick with them.
No, it's more about, well, not trusting the elites or the current system. Understanding that history repeats itself, he shows a Dow Jones chart with crashes from 1895 to 2015, seeing gold and silver as insurance.
Insurance against stupidity, basically.
That's pretty much his phrasing later on, yeah. Insurance against the stupidity of the elites. Plus, they're simple, tangible assets. And fundamentally, he sees them as God's money, enduring value.
He even talks about the origin of interest, like in-kind lending.
Yeah, like lending cows and getting back cows plus calves. Real production. He contrasts that with modern banking, where it's just money making more money, essentially printing it.
And his advice on owning gold is specific, right? Physical gold, not paper gold.
Definitely. He says own real coins or bars in a private vault, not ETFs, because he cites these estimates. Maybe 100, maybe even 500 paper claims floating around for every one actual physical ounce of gold.
Wow. If true, that's a huge disconnect. So if everyone wanted their physical gold at once...
Big problems, exactly. This leads him to the wider impact, the societal consequences. He uses a chart showing the wealth gap widening dramatically since 1979.
The rich getting richer.
And everyone else kind of stagnating or falling behind. He quotes Stephen Brill saying elites have built an economy based on making deals, not necessarily creating new wealth.
Which feels related to his concerns about baby boomers retiring.
Sure. He worries they don't have enough saved, points to huge pension funds like CalPERS being massively underfunded, like $1 trillion short. And then there are the big ones, Social Security and Medicare, facing huge future challenges.
It seems like a lot of systems are under strain.
And he adds that Congress hasn't even passed a proper comprehensive budget since 1994, contributing to entitlement spending just swelling.
Right.
He sees a potential for bankruptcy down the line.
So all this ties back to his lie, #1, saving money will make you rich.
Exactly. If the dollar itself keeps losing purchasing power, which another chart shows it has consistently since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, then just saving those dollars might not be enough.
It's definitely a lot to take in. He calls it a 1,000-piece puzzle, right? Money and life.
Yeah, emphasizing that learning about this stuff is a lifelong process. There is no single easy answer.
So why doesn't traditional education, the academic elites, teach this stuff? What's his take?
Well, he's a bit cynical. He suggests maybe most people just aren't that interested in the real truth about money. And the truth that money is fundamentally about survival maybe isn't very palatable.
It's easier to stick with the simpler narrative.
Perhaps. And he reminds us of history printing fake money leading to disaster in 1920s Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. It's happened before.
And when bubbles burst, he argues money doesn't just disappear. It transfers.
Right. From the losers, the average investors maybe, to the winners, the insiders, or those who are prepared. He disagrees with that saying, you don't lose if you don't sell. He says the value can just vanish. Poof.
And he even warns about bail-ins next time, not bailouts.
Yeah, the idea that instead of the government saving banks, the banks might just take depositors' money directly to recapitalize themselves. Cyprus did it. It's a scary thought.
Definitely. So this leads to more reasons for gold and silver, philosophical ones.
8 of them. Starting with trust. Or rather, a lack of trust. Not trusting fake money, not trusting the elites, not trusting predictions about the future.
But trusting gold and silver.
Trusting God's money, as he calls it. And again, stressing they aren't investments, they're insurance. Insurance against the potential mistakes of those in charge.
He also says their price goes up and down because the value of fake money changes.
Exactly. So when gold goes down relative to the dollar, he sees it as the dollar getting temporarily stronger, and he actually buys more gold.
Interesting perspective. And then he has those 5 Gs for realists.
Gold and silver, grub meaning food, gasoline, ground land, especially with water, and guns and ammo for protection, maybe even currency in a worst-case scenario.
Pretty basic foundational stuff.
Very pragmatic. A stark contrast to the complexity of derivatives and fake money. Simple, real things versus complex, potentially unreal things.
Okay, that covers fake money pretty thoroughly. Let's shift to the next part, fake teachers. What's the core distinction he's making here?
It's simple but powerful. Fake teachers talk, real teachers do. Teachers might have all the degrees, but they don't practice what they preach. Real teachers are in the trenches doing it every day.
And he uses his own dads as the prime example, right?
The classic contrast. His poor dad was the head of education for Hawaii Super Educated, Stanford, Chicago, Northwestern. But when young Robert asked him about learning about money in school,
The answer was,
we don't teach about money in school.
right.
Just flat out. That's what sent him looking for a real teacher.
His rich dad, who didn't even finish high school.
Right. Never finished high school, but built businesses, invested, became wealthy through practical experience. It's a stark illustration of Kiyosaki's point about academic versus real-world knowledge.
He tells another story about asking his teacher in 4th grade.
Yeah, when will we learn about money? And the teacher basically said the same thing. School's not for that. His rich dad's explanation was blunt. Schools train employees, not entrepreneurs.
Oof. That's a challenging view of the education system.
It is. He contrasts it with his experience in Navy flight school, where all the instructors were actual pilots. They could do the thing they were teaching. Real teachers.
So it's about credibility that comes from experience.
Exactly. And this idea connects to lifelong learning. He mentions a Sunday school lesson about the 3 wise men. They were wise because they never stopped searching for great teachers.
So learning doesn't stop after school. It should be continuous.
And ideally, it involves apprenticeship, mentorship, learning by doing, like his own experience learning from Rich Dad, playing Monopoly, doing small deals, getting hands-on business lessons.
Real-world stuff, not just theory.
Right. He then shares this kind of sad story about his 60th 5th grade reunion back in Hilo. He just noticed signs everywhere for EBT, electronic benefits transfer, of food stamps. And it struck him how many people seemed reliant on government help, the very thing his rich dad taught him to become independent of.
That ties into his points about student debt too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Over $1.5 trillion in student debt back in 2018. He questions if piling on debt for traditional education is really the answer, especially when you see the huge pay gap between CEOs and average workers. Is that degree translating to real financial well-being?
It's a fair question. He has some kind of pyramid about teaching.
Yeah, the higher levels of teacher pyramid, it basically shows you retain way more information from active learning, doing things, teaching others based on experience, compared to passive stuff like just listening to lectures or reading.
And real teachers teach from their mistakes.
That's a key point. They aren't afraid to say, I messed this up, here's what I learned. That's often where the best lessons are.
He also quotes his rich dad about entrepreneurs needing to watch the future.
Your competition is the future. And Andy Grove's famous line, only the paranoid survive. It's about constantly scanning the horizon, anticipating change, which maybe isn't emphasized enough in standard education.
So going back to that proverb, catching fish in muddy water.
It connects to seeing the invisible. Real learning, real opportunities, they're often in the messy, complex, difficult stuff. Not the easy, clean stuff. Like learning golf, he says it's hard.
And he suggests maybe prosperity has made people a bit soft,
Good.
entitled.
Yeah, a bit weak, lazy, expecting things. He even mentions President Obama observing that corruption is widespread, but Kiyosaki circles back to the individual.
Change yourself, not the world.
Kind of. He argues the root is corrupt money and the lack of real financial education. If people understood money better, maybe they wouldn't fall prey to or participate in corrupt systems.
We didn't get the details here, but this relates to his cash flow quadrant idea, right? Moving beyond just being an employee.
Exactly. It's about understanding different ways of generating income and reinforcing that point about houses. If it takes money out of your pocket, it's a liability, no matter what the bank or realtor tells you.
He learned a lot from a short real estate course, more than his MBA attempt.
That's his story. A 3-day course taught him about using debt to buy a cash-flowing condo, achieving potentially infinite returns because he had little or none of his own money tied up after refinancing, but the asset kept paying him.
Infinite return. How does that work exactly? With stocks or books too?
The idea is if you buy an asset using debt or create an asset like a book, and it generates enough cash flow to pay off any initial costs or loans, then eventually the income it produces is theoretically an infinite return on your original invested capital, which might be zero by then. The asset becomes free but keeps producing.
Okay, I see. And the final punchline for this section.
In real life, your banker doesn't care about your GPA. They care about your financial statement. Can you manage money? That's the real test.
Makes sense. Okay, so briefly then, the last category, fake assets. What falls into this?
Based on what we've covered, it seems to be things people think are assets, often retirement plans or savings vehicles, but which might actually be draining wealth through fees, low returns, or not keeping up with inflation.
So things like 401k or mutual funds could be fake assets in his view.
Potentially, yes, if they aren't performing well or if the fees are too high. The big concern ties back to the baby boomers. Are they relying on assets that won't actually support them in retirement?
Right, that lack of real financial security in old age.
That seems to be the core worry driving his definition of fake assets. It circles back to needing real financial education to tell the difference.
Okay, so pulling this all together, we've explored Kiyosaki's ideas on fake money questioning fiat currency, advocating for gold and silver. Then fake teachers valuing real-world experience over just credentials. And fake assets being critical about what truly builds wealth.
And the key thing is how they all connect. His view is that a system based on fake money, taught by fake teachers, leads people to invest in fake assets. It paints a picture that really demands critical thinking.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, the big question Kiyosaki seems to pose is, given all this potential fakeness in the system, what are you going to do? How will you navigate these muddy waters to find real financial security?
It really is like that 1,000-piece puzzle he mentioned. You've got to keep searching for the pieces yourself. Keep learning, keep questioning. That seems to be the main message.